and I'm seeing this now all the time on YouTube. The videos that I have that get the most attention and the most attack are those videos in which I'm trying to make a 4-minute defense of slavery in the Bible, because you'll see that word used in the Bible. And, it's hard to do that in 4 minutes. You're just not going to be nuanced, that's for sure.
Tonight, we're going to be going over J. Warner Wallace, and he is going to attempt to defeat an atheist argument. In fact, he's going to attempt to defeat the most common atheist argument against Christianity. And I'm kind of curious as to what this common argument is that everybody seems to use in order to argue against Christianity. And I wonder how he comes at it. So we're going to be taking a look at his response tonight. If you want to fuck around and find out exactly how J. Warner Wallace defeats the most common atheist argument, then please stay tuned. What's up, heathens? How y'all doing? Here's J. Warner Wallace. He's going to be responding to a crowd question about the most common atheist argument. So let's get on into it.
What is the most common argument against Christianity? Maybe that comes up.
Okay, as an atheist myself and somebody that provides arguments against Christianity, I want to give my own, what I think is the most common argument against Christianity. And I feel like the simplest and most common argument against it is no sufficient evidence to prove the claims of the Bible. I feel like that's essentially where you have to start out, is that there's just no good evidence to support anything that the Bible claims. Anything after that point is just sort of like icing on the cake. Like, I mean, anything you come up with after that is just added on. Like, it's just extra shit, because you don't have sufficient evidence for the claims of your book. It doesn't matter like what the internal logic is of the book or, anything else. If you don't have sufficient evidence, then you don't have anything. You ain't got shit, motherfucker. No, okay. I'm trying to do this serious and shit. I feel like that's where you have to start out. I want to say the lack of sufficient evidence for the claims of the Bible has got to be one of the most common arguments against it. Of course, I'm not all atheists, obviously. Thank God. I would think that that's where you would have to start out. Is lack of sufficient evidence.
And maybe both of you.
Yeah, what do you think? What's it for you? Well, it's maybe different for you than me.
I like what you said this morning. So I want on how things have shifted, but I think usually on the campus setting with people who are trying to be intellectual and offer the most intellectual objections, it's going to be things that fall under the banner of the problem of evil. And it basically comes down to this. Look, Christians, you say that God is perfect. He's omnipotent, which means he's all powerful. He's omniscient, which means he's all knowing. And that he's omnibenevolent, which means he's all loving. Well, look, if he's all powerful, he'd be able to stop all the pain, evil, and suffering in the world, from natural disasters to Hitler and coronavirus to Ted Bundy or whoever, right?
I feel like the problem of evil is a good argument against the internal logic of the Bible, of Christian theology. But still, I don't think that tops lack of sufficient evidence for anything in the Bible. Because, I mean, that hits it before any kind of logic really comes into play. Like, logically consistent internally to the theology, I think, comes after that. But in any case, the problem of evil. So the way that I use the problem of evil is typically in like moral arguments against Christianity, not really Christianity on the whole or anything like that. I typically bring it up whenever somebody's trying to tell me that you have to have God to be moral, or that the morals come from God, or something like that. Like that's when the problem of evil comes up for me. But the problem of evil and having that discussion with a Christian kind of puts them in a weird position. If they're going to hold to this idea that this God is omnipresent, omnibenevolent, and omniscient, then they're going to have to admit, or at least say, that slavery is good. There are certain situations where slavery is a good thing. It puts them in the position of having to say that obviously horrible and deplorable shit are good. And it's a very uncomfortable situation whenever you put them there, because they're obviously not not going to bend on God being good all the time and all the time. God is good. They're not going to bend on that. And even in the Bible, God says that he creates evil. So you have to come to terms with the fact that God sometimes does evil and he calls it good. Now, it doesn't make sense to me whatsoever. Like that whole conundrum right there just doesn't make any kind of fucking sense, because obviously there are horrible things in this world, but God allows them to happen because for some reason it's a good thing for them to happen. It's a good thing for kids to be kidnapped and raped and then killed within 48 hours. As somebody that holds to the position that God is good all the time and he's omnipresent and he knows everything and he's planned all this shit out, he knows it he has foreknowledge of all this. You have to say that shit like that is a good thing that happened. And I feel like that reveals how shitty your position is. I'm not gonna go as far as to say you yourself are a shitty person, because you could be indoctrinated to think this way, and that's not necessarily your fault. But it is a very shitty position to have. And the problem of evil puts Christians, like Christian apologists or anybody that you're discussing this with, in a very uneasy position of having to explain that and having to say that those things are horrible. Oh yeah, that's right. Mother Teresa, suffering brings you closer to God. So obviously there you go. One response that I do get a lot of the times to that is free will. Like, God gives us free will and he can't, he doesn't want to impose his will on us, which totally contradicted by the Old Testament. It's I mean, in the Old Testament, God not perfectly, but he elaborates on how to encrust his Ark of the Covenant and how to decorate his temple, like going down to like exact measurements and exactly how much gold to encrust his dildo collection with. It's ridiculous to say that God doesn't want to impose his will on us. But in any case, if that were the response that I would get, I would point out that God or Jesus or the Holy Spirit or fucking King David popping into existence, punching a pedophile priest in the dick right before he rapes a child, and then poofing out of existence is not affecting free will. Like, if I could somehow magically pop into existence, punch a dude in the dick, and then pop out of existence, that's not me affecting his free will. That's just him, that's just him suffering the consequences of his dumbass decisions. Right? That's not affecting his free will. So God could definitely, because he's done it in the past, he's popped into existence and popped out of existence in order to do something. So God could definitely do it, right? If he's everywhere, he could definitely do it anytime anything happens and without affecting free will. So that's how I would respond to that. May not be the best response, but I feel like it gets the job done.
God would have the power to stop it. And if he's omniscient, like you say he is, well, then he's going to have the knowledge how to use his power to stop it. And look, you say he's all loving too, that he's omnibenevolent. Well, then he would want to do it. But look at all this pain, evil, and suffering. So look, Christians, what one isn't he? He can't be all three. He's probably not even any of them. And look, Christians, you say that the definition of God is a maximally great being. Well, if he's not all three of these, then your God doesn't even exist.
That's one way you could use the argument. I really don't think that necessarily means that God doesn't exist, even the Christian God, because the Christian God could just be some weird interpretation of everything that we just simply don't understand yet. I feel like jumping to that conclusion would be a little bit premature. It comes down to a few things. Either these apologists have to admit that horrible things are sometimes good just because God allows it, or God does not fulfill those three things. I feel like they're put in a position where they got to choose between those two options. There could be more options. I'm just not thinking of them right now. I don't mean to present a false dichotomy here. I feel like they get put in that kind of position. So I'm genuinely curious. He's obviously not going to go the route that I would want him to go in, but I'm curious to see where he goes.
Even exist, right? So
could you see him role playing in front of this high school pastorate over here? I feel that would be pretty scary, right? So
yeah, I've had a lot of conversations with atheists. I can give their arguments better than they can usually. Yeah.
Really? I don't know. Maybe you've had that conversation with an atheist before, but I sincerely doubt that you can recite atheist arguments better than atheists themselves. Typically, it never goes that way. For most apologists out there, I would say that they probably cannot recite atheist arguments better than atheists themselves. Now, as far as like him knowing or him reciting the straw man arguments that he thinks he understands, then I would say, yes, you can repeat the straw man arguments that you create perfectly.
But in fact, I wrote a book. It was my doctoral dissertation, and it was pretty philosophical and theological. But at the end, in the last chapter, I wanted to show how the rubber hits the road and how we can answer questions. And Paul says we destroy every argument raised against the knowledge of God and take every thought captive to obey Christ. I love that verse for two reasons.
Why would you love that verse? Take every thought captive for Christ? You're talking about thought control, and you think that's good? Well, why would you think that thought control is good? It really kind of clashes with the whole free will thing, doesn't it? Because like if you're capturing every thought for Christ, then you don't have free will. I don't know where he stands on free will, but it would seem like if in the theology of Christianity, you're supposed to capture every thought for Christ, it seems like you don't have free will. I don't know, maybe I'm not understanding what he's saying.
But for the first part, it says we destroy every argument raised against the knowledge of God. Well, that problem of evil is exactly that. And so I spent a lot of time showing why an all-powerful, all-knowing, and perfectly loving God would allow all this pain, evil, and suffering. And I wrote about this in my doctoral dissertation, and then it became a book. It's published by Whippenstock. It's out there right now. Usually $38. We got it on sale out there for $20. But I answer that
shameless
question.
Pitch for books.
Shameless pitch.
Yes.
But I do answer that question in the final chapter. So yeah, problem of evil would be the biggest intellectual objection raised.
Damn, I really wish he would, because I am not going to go buy his book. I'm sorry, whatever your name is here. I'm just not going to go buy your book to get the answer to the problem of evil. It just really seemed like you were just wanting people to buy your book if they really want to know your answer, which, I mean, from a marketing standpoint, I guess that's not a bad thing. I take it that he's kind of the host here, so maybe it's not the point for him to answer, but maybe at some point in the future, we'll get him actually discussing it, but I guess we're not going to get that luxury tonight.
But Jim, why don't you talk about how it's shifted a little bit?
Well, and we talked about this morning after church, I think that's just kind of a shading of the problem of evil, really. But I think what we have now is we're in a cancel culture that suggests that unless we adopt the snapshot of cultural values in the moment, if we don't adopt that snapshot, that not only are you wrong, but you're evil. To the point where I can come in and turn over your table in a restaurant or burn down your business.
I'm sorry, is that not what Jesus did? Like, Jesus went into a temple and started flipping tables and shit. Is he meaning to make an allusion to this? But in any case, yeah, I would say that we are morally more advanced than people that wrote the Bible. I really think that fact alone shows that God is not the moral foundation of reality. The power of Christ compel you to get the fuck out of here.
Or trash your car. This is happening all over the country right now. And it used to be, you see, we're pulling down statues right and left, right? So we have people in our past, is a history, which is true, who have held views that we would say are repugnant today. Okay? That's going to be true of every culture, by the way.
Well, yes, it is. It's true of every culture. But we're not the ones claiming to have the absolute moral foundation that is supposed to be transcendent throughout all time and all cultures. I mean, that's the problem here. I mean, we're not suggesting that anybody's moral foundation is the absolute moral foundation that we should all live by. Nobody is claiming that. Not even in our current time frame. We're not claiming that our moral foundation is the best one. But we do feel like that our moral foundation is way better than whatever in the fuck conservative Christians think the absolute moral foundation of all time is. You're really shooting your own self in the foot here by having this particular complaint, because we're not the ones that are saying we have the absolute moral foundation of all history of all human civilization.
But okay, so now those statues are being torn down, and they now will go and say, well, it's not just that they were the white conservatives who held that view at the founding of the country, it's that they were white conservative Christians, and it was their Christian worldview that grounded their racism.
What? No, nobody's tearing down Confederate statues or anything like that because they're Christian. Like, sure, they were Christian, but it's not because they were Christian that it's being torn down. It's totally irrelevant to the matter of not memorializing racists and slave owners. It doesn't matter what religion you are. There have been plenty of people in the past that have been different religions that are not Christian that have still been racist, that have still owned slaves in other parts of the world. So, I mean, the fact that we don't want to memorialize the Confederates because of their racism and because they were fighting to own other people is not because you're Christian. This is called manufacturing persecution.
That grounded their view of slavery. And I'm seeing this now all the time on YouTube. The videos that I have that get the most attention and the most attack are those videos in which I'm trying to make a 4-minute defense of slavery in the Bible, because you'll see that word used in the Bible. And, it's hard to do that in 4 minutes. You're just not going to be nuanced, that's for sure.
Yeah, because you can't defend the Bible against its use of slavery. Like, there's no way that you can defend the Bible against claims that it promotes and condones slavery and that it has God promoting and condoning slavery. I just put out a director's cut of a previous live stream this week that did an in-depth analysis of the slave verses in the Bible. And I explained all of that. So no, J. Werner Wallace, you can't make a 4-minute video where you excuse away the slavery in the Bible, which I've actually got his little 4-minute video on my channel here where he defends slavery, and I ripped that apart too. You can't make a 4-minute video and defend the Bible against condoning slavery, because it definitely condones slavery all over the place, J. Warner Wallace. So you have to admit that your God thinks that it's okay, and he mandated, at least at one time, that you should own another person as property. You just have to, like, I don't mean to present like a false dichotomy or anything like that, but you're stuck in a hard place here, because you've either got to admit that God loves slavery, he at least condones it and orders that it happen, or you sit there and you lie about what the Bible says in order to maintain this idea, this facade that the Bible doesn't support slavery. You're being put between a rock and a hard place here, and there's no good way out of it.
So I see this all the time. So what's now happening is that this is a cancelable worldview, because I saw a TikTok video last week in which they were arguing that Jesus uses a racial slur when he tells the Phoenician woman, the woman who comes to him and says that she wants to be, he says, we don't want to cast it to dogs. She called her, basically he's suggesting that his describing her as a dog is not a way of testing her faith, which is what it was, but is instead it's a bald-faced racial slur that Jesus is using, that Jesus used. You can see they're kind of heading toward a view that says that Jesus is cancelable in the same way that anyone else who offends the cultural sensibilities is cancelable.
Well, I think that considering that the Bible doesn't relay accurate information about Jesus, I wouldn't exactly take that as like a Jesus is cancelable type of moment. The reason why in that particular instance Jesus called her a dog was because she was of a different, nation. She was of a different people group, and he referenced to her like she was a dog. I feel like it's a little bit of a stretch to say that it's like a racial slur, but it definitely was painting her as part of the out group. It was definitely painting her as somebody outside of the Israelite group of people, outside of the Christian group of people. It's a very othering. It's a bit of a stretch to say that it was a racial slur. I would definitely say that it's part of this whole out group shunning type of language in it. Everybody should look down on that kind of language and that kind of attitude. Of course, you notice he kind of added in there like, oh, that's not actually what happened. But I mean, that is what happened. I mean, he did do that. He referred to her that way. People are standing up and using their voice against white Christian nationalism, the religious conservative right that seems to be fucking this country up in any way that they can. Those are the two things. And if you find yourself in that particular crowd, this is not the channel for you. This is the certified Wokey channel. In any case, I don't think that anybody's trying to cancel Jesus, and I feel like this is more like manufactured persecution just on behalf of their Lord and Savior.
And that's where I think the future is going to be to defend. Is going to be, hey, are we able to make, because it's just really bad hermeneutics, this idea that I can pick a verse out or a sentence out or a word out and try to tell you what Jesus meant by it, but I'm going to ignore the entire chapter leading up to it and the entire chapter leading behind it. I'm going to take it out of context and then have a complaint against Christianity.
I'm sorry, J. Warner Wallace, but you, meaning apologists, do it all the fucking time. Every chance you get, you cherry pick out of the Bible, and you will totally ignore the preceding chapter and the chapter that comes after it. You will ignore the entire context. In the slavery video alone, you ignored the context of every single Bible verse you brought up in order to make your point that the slavery in the Bible was purely and only ever indentured servitude. The only difference here is that you're trying to defend the Bible where somebody else is trying to attack, I guess, the Bible. That's the only difference between these two positions here. And I find it wildly just ridiculous that he's attempting to act like he's any different than what he just described.
Remember, the people who, if you think that Christianity affirms slavery, well, this is why the people who abolished slavery were all secularists who had to explain that the Christianity was wrong. No, actually, the abolitionists were all Christians who said it's time to read the thing in its context.
Oh, the fact is that during the Civil War, leading up to the Civil War, during the Civil War, and even after the Civil War, obviously there were Christians on both sides of things, right? There were Christians that were abolitionists, and there were Christians that totally wanted to own other people as property. And they both used the Bible in order to support their positions. It's just simply not about whether or not Christians supported or didn't support slavery. It's the fact that the Confederates wanted to own people as slaves, as chattel slaves. And then, of course, there were other people that didn't. And there were still people in the South that didn't agree with owning slaves, but they were stuck in the South. He's trying to make it out like Christians were the ones that led, like, because of their religion, because of how they understood Christianity. That's what compelled them to be abolitionists, because of what they read in the Bible. But I really don't see that in the history books. So what I see in the history books are people that realize that it's not humane to own another person as a slave. And despite what their Bible says about owning slaves, and despite their God telling them that they can buy people from other nations, despite all of that, they choose to reinterpret their religion to be more abolitionist-like. It's not about the correct interpretation of the Bible. For me, in this particular situation, it's about how the Bible can be used to support both positions. And both positions require you to cherry pick out of the Bible in order to support those positions. They're literally no different if you're going to take that particular stance on it. But I really and truly think that it's obviously not because the Bible is an abolitionist book, right? That's definitely not the reason, because it's not. It's because people thought it was wrong to own another person as property. That's what it boils down to. It's not because of their religion or anything like that.
So how could it be that the same document that was used by the abolitionists supposedly supports slavery? Something's not jiving here. What is it? And so I think it's important for us now to be able to make that case to people. That's the new.
Yeah, and I would just say one argument that we like to use a lot is called the moral argument, and it shows that if anything, any action is really, objectively speaking, right or wrong, then God has to exist. And I have an article on my website, I think it's called, "If You Think Racism is Really Wrong, You Ought to Be a Christian." Because God's existence, or what we call theism, is the only way to make sense of saying that racism is really wrong or objectively wrong, as opposed to...
Why don't y'all just come to the pulpit with me, why don't you? Thank you, brothers and sisters, for coming to this church service today. I'm going to prove to you that the Bible is definitely racist and wants you to own people as slaves. At least in certain portions of the Bible. If you read the right portions, then apparently it doesn't. I didn't know that. Anyways, Leviticus 25:44-46. Because apparently this apologist that we're looking at tonight has not read this particular fucking section of the Bible. Your male and female slaves are to come from the nations around you. From them you may buy slaves. You may also buy some of the temporary residents living among you. That would be the immigrants. You know, those people that Trump thinks is, I guess, getting across the border or something. Christians should buy them from within the United States as slave labor, living among you and members of their clans born in your country. And they will become your property! I feel like I need to scream in order to get it through this guy's thick fucking skull. You can bequeath them to your children as inherited property and make them slaves for life, but you must not rule over your fellow Israelites ruthlessly. Again, Leviticus 25:44-46. So again, if you think that racism and slavery are wrong, I'm not going to say you shouldn't be Christian, but you have to come to terms with the fact that your religion supports both of them. You have to understand the history of like races in order to really understand how the Bible supports racism. Okay. Because God was totally a racist. He was, if there was a, not necessarily white nationalist, but you know, an Israelite nationalist, it's definitely God. Okay. So, just to sort of give a brief explanation here, race, the idea of race has changed over time. At the particular time that the Bible was written, races are synonymous with just nations or people groups. So whenever you see in the Old Testament that God says that you should hate these other nations, or that you should buy slaves from the nations around you, or, you know, God is casting hate and telling the Israelites to utterly destroy an entire group of people, that's him being racist. That is racism. And that's not like a far-fetched thing. That's not reaching in order to come up with that. That's just how races have evolved over time. Started off as people groups and nations and stuff like that, and they slowly transformed into how we understand race today. But at this time, that was what race was. People groups and nations and entire countries. Those were races at the time. So yes, God was racist. God wanted his people to own other people as property. And it's plain as day, too.
Just your subjective opinion, right? If it's really wrong, no matter what anybody thinks, then God has to exist. And then I make the case that it's really Christianity that makes the most sense of racism being wrong.
How? I mean, I get it. He's kind of peddling his own brand here, because he's not going to tell us exactly how the Bible does this, or how the Bible is anti-racist or anti-nationalist. I have no fucking idea why he would think that. I can't possibly think of, other than cherry picking and totally misrepresenting the Bible, I cannot think of a single way that you can make a coherent argument that supports the Bible in that way. There's just no way that you can do it coherently. It blows my mind that he's sitting there saying that God has to exist if there are things that we find today as absolutely abhorrent and immoral. Look, it's not just slavery, right? That's not the only evil that Christianity really has to answer for. Okay. What other evils, you ask? Well, if we just look at how Christianity treats women, the social status of women in Christianity and how that's evolved over time, is strikingly similar to the race discussion. How, you know, with slavery and racism, how prior to 1865, the Bible definitely supported it. Everybody was perfectly fine with it. It says right there in the Bible, own other people. This is biblical shit. And then 1865 rolls around. The social norms are changing. They're moving. They're currently shifting. And then all of a sudden, it's like, God never wanted us to own slaves. What are you talking about? God ain't racist. He doesn't do violence. What? I don't know what you're talking about. Violence and God just doesn't seem to make. You mean the motherfucker that flooded the entire earth and killed every single person on earth? Man, woman, baby, child, even the unborn children that you're so fucking concerned with now that you're going to force people to have babies? Now he once killed all of those motherfuckers. It fucking blows my mind. It's a mind fuck.
And I've given this talk. In fact, it was really a year ago, almost exactly, right before COVID hit. I gave that same talk at Louisville about racism. And if you think racism is wrong, you ought to be a Christian. So as soon as anybody starts saying things like, oh, Jesus was a racist, really, say, slow down, not so fast. Let's talk about what makes racism wrong. And then let's look at what Jesus actually taught. And then let's look at the history. Who was it that fought against racism? Who was it that has fought against racism more than anybody else? It is Christ followers.
You see, I failed to see that in history. Like, I failed to see the Christ followers as being the ones that fought most, like, against slavery. It's not like the North was purely abolitionist, right? And it wasn't that the South was purely pro-slavery, right? There was a mix, but that's kind of my point. There were Christians on both sides of this conflict because at that particular time, what other religions were in the United States? I mean, I'm sure that there were other religions. I'm not trying to sound obtuse and think that there weren't other religions that were in the States, but I would say the majority, because it's still even now a majority Christians that are in this nation, although that number is shrinking, by the way. It's shrinking every day. But the fact that there were Christians on both sides means that you can't use the argument that you just used. You can't sit there and say, oh, there were more Christians that were against slavery than there were Christians that were for slavery, that were also using the Bible for it. Like, you can't sit there and be like, well, I had Christians on my side, but the pro-slavery people are like, well, there's Christians over here too. They were all Christian. It doesn't matter that they were Christian. It matters as to whether or not they wanted to own people as property. Because no argument that you could make about the Civil War would ever boil down to anything other than fighting to own people as slaves. That's what it boiled down to. And, that's why it doesn't matter if they were Christian or not Christian. So, yeah, it's, again, go to my website, his stuff, search the moral argument, and you can, you'll be equipped to have these conversations. So as far as the moral argument goes, but I'll let, J. Warner Wallace talk here in a second. But as far as the moral argument goes, the reason why the moral argument is such a bad argument is because within Christianity, you have an ever-changing moral foundation. Every time the social norms of a civilization change, the interpretations of the religions within that society, within that civilization also change. The same thing has happened to Christianity when the social norms surrounding how women are treated, or slavery, or races, or LGBTQ community, any of those marginalized groups. Anytime the social norms around them have changed, Christianity, albeit they were kicking and screaming the entire time, has also changed with the social norms. Because the Christianity that J. Warner Wallace thinks is Christianity now is totally different than the Christianity that existed 200 years ago or more. It's just, it's totally different.
You know, it's interesting. If I told you that I needed you to buy a particular cat food, I wouldn't have to tell you where to go to get it. You already know where to go to get cat food online. If you're buying cat food online, maybe you just buy it at the store. But I know there's certain things I don't need to tell Susie that she can find that on Amazon and on Costco, because she's she's interested in those things, and so she's already looked for them. What we want to do is to get you so interested that you already know the 5 websites you would go to parse out that argument, because you've been thinking about this for years. You already know. I don't have to teach you how to do some searches. We shouldn't really have to even teach you how to do these, right? This is the most important stuff. As C.S. Lewis said, it's either, if this is true, it's of ultimate importance. If it's false, it's of no importance. But the one thing it cannot be is moderately important. It's either of ultimate importance or of no importance. So we ought to be like, yeah, I know how to answer that because this is of ultimate importance. Right? This is the biggest thing that I can think about.
Yeah, so I feel like this is him just pumping up his own, I guess, job, because I feel like he's artificially inflating how important his job is, because he's trying to make this whole conversation over whether or not God is the ultimate source of morality or morals in general. Him saying that should be the most important question, or God in general should be the most important question. I feel like that's just one, trying to make his job look even more important than it really is. And 2, it goes back to the whole capture every thought for Christ.
Right? That's part of what we're trying to do, is help you just kind of kickstart this process that'll get you. Look, we have don't tell me you don't have disposable time. We have we're empty nesters now. We have disposable time. We spend that time eating most of the time, or running, and we dance every night. And then we have the end of the day. Sometimes we're like, we got an extra hour. You want to watch something? Well, now we're like, okay, we could, but we usually end up back in the book of Acts or someplace, geeking out over the stuff that we think has ultimate importance. So it's about where we're spending our disposable time.
Okay, and that's it. Disposable time. I don't know who has that kind of disposable time that they want to bother themselves with J. Warner Wallace shit, but there are people out there that do. Well, that's going to be it for his video tonight. I really appreciate everybody coming out. Needless to say, I'm very unimpressed with both of their answers. Obviously, the one guy was really just pushing his own brand, pushing people to buy his book, and visit his website and all this other stuff. J. Warner Wallace didn't offer anything any better other than just to say that the Bible doesn't condone all the horrible shit that people say it condones, when it really does. And he obviously doesn't have a problem with the problem of evil. I feel like it puts them in a difficult position. Overall, I felt like this video did not actually answer any argument that an atheist might have. I mean, it had one poorly formed straw man argument using the problem of evil, and then they just said, oh, well, if you think that there are things that are objectively or absolutely wrong in this world, then you should be a Christian. And it amazes me that he said that. So it's really just, I appreciate everybody coming out tonight. If you will, please go down below. Let me know what you think in the comments down there. I try to go through the comments and respond to some people in there. So definitely go down there in the comments and let me know what you think. And while you're down there, why don't you smash that like button and subscribe if you like this kind of content. Thank you so much for watching. Don't forget to stand up and use your voice. Bye, heathens.